What if I told you the Vikings never stopped raiding? They just changed their weapons. Today's descendants have conquered the world again, not with swords or ships, but with something far more powerful. When you think of Vikings, you probably picture longships slicing through the North Sea, raiders landing on foreign shores, and treasure carried back to Norway. But in truth, the modern descendants of those Vikings pulled off a far greater raid, and they didn't need swords or sails to do it. They struck black gold in their own waters, and instead of plundering, they built a money machine so powerful it now holds more wealth than any empire the Vikings ever dreamed of. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. This is the story of how Norway turned oil into the world's largest sovereign wealth fund and what it teaches us about the laws of money and power. To understand this miracle, you have to start with where Norway stood before oil. In the early 20th century, Norway was not rich. It was a modest nation on the fringes of Europe, living off fishing, shipping, and small-scale industry. For centuries, Norwegians survived through hard labor and by sending their sons to sea. Even after independence from Sweden in 1905, Norway remained one of the poorer nations in Western Europe. No one in 1950 would have predicted it would one day become one of the wealthiest societies on earth. Then came the modern Viking raid, not on foreign lands, but beneath the sea. In the 1960s, seismic surveys revealed vast oil reserves under the North Sea. And in 1969, the Ekofisk field was discovered, one of the largest oil fields in the world. For a nation of barely 4 million people, it was staggering. It was as if the gods had opened a treasure chest under the waves. But history had a warning written all over it. Most countries that strike oil end up cursed by it. Economists call it the resource curse, the paradox of easy money that destroys nations. Oil wealth fuels corruption, inflates currencies, and hollows out industries. Venezuela, Nigeria, even Saudi Arabia all became symbols of how oil can make a country rich and fragile at the same time. Norway saw the trap and refused to fall into it. Instead of spending wildly, it built rules. In the 1970s, the government created Statoil, a state-owned company, to keep control over its oil. Taxes on oil profits were set high, ensuring that wealth flowed back to the public. And, crucially, Norway's leaders began debating how to prevent oil from overheating the economy, a phenomenon known as Dutch disease, named after the Netherlands' disastrous gas boom. Across party lines, Norwegian politicians agreed on something almost revolutionary. This treasure wasn't theirs to spend. It belonged to the nation and to generations not yet born. In this restraint, the Norwegians revealed a deeper Viking instinct, long-term thinking. The Vikings once built ships strong enough to cross oceans. Their descendants built institutions strong enough to outlast empires. In 1990, Norway created the Government Petroleum Fund, later renamed the Government Pension Fund Global. Its rules were simple and strict. All oil revenues flowed into the fund. The government could spend only a small fraction of it each year, capped at about 4% of its value. The rest would be invested globally across stocks, bonds, and real estate. This was not a rainy day fund. It was a fortress, a financial longship designed to sail through storms for centuries. At first, the numbers were modest. Oil money trickled in, and returns took years to appear. But like a patient crew rowing through the night, discipline paid off. By the 2000s, the fund had exploded into the hundreds of billions. Today, it stands at over $1.5 trillion, the largest sovereign wealth fund on Earth. It owns roughly 1.5% of all listed stocks in the world, with real estate holdings in New York, London, and Paris. For every Norwegian citizen, that amounts to about $250,000. That's more treasure per capita than any Viking raiding party ever carried home. But the real secret wasn't oil, it was restraint. When oil prices surged, Norway didn't splurge. While others spent on subsidies, palaces, or vanity projects, Norway stuck to the 4% rule. No matter how rich the fund grew, the government could draw only a small fraction of it each year. It was political dynamite telling politicians they couldn't touch the mountain of gold beneath their feet, but it held. The result was remarkable stability. Inflation stayed low, the currency avoided overheating, and the wealth of tomorrow stayed protected from the greed of today. Transparency became another cornerstone. Most sovereign wealth funds operate in secrecy. Norway's became one of the most transparent in the world. Every citizen can see where the money is invested. Ethical guidelines forbid investing in companies that violate human rights or destroy the environment. Imagine if Viking raiders had not only brought treasure home, but kept public ledgers of every coin. That's how radical this transparency was in global finance. Meanwhile, the contrast abroad was brutal. Venezuela, once rich in oil, spent recklessly and collapsed when prices fell. Nigeria's oil wealth vanished into corruption. Even Saudi Arabia, awash in petrodollars, built grand projects while struggling to diversify. Norway's strategy flipped the pattern. It turned oil into an investment machine designed to outlive oil itself. As the world shifts toward renewables, Norway's fortune is already secured invested in global markets rather than buried in barrels. Still, the model isn't perfect. Critics point out the irony. A fund built on fossil fuels now positions itself as an ethical investor. Others warn that future leaders could grow complacent, spending more and saving less as the memory of scarcity fades. And like any investor, Norway's fund is vulnerable to global market swings. But compared to the fate of most resource-rich nations, Norway's story is not luck. It's policy written in discipline. The genius wasn't financial, it was cultural. A country forged by long winters and limited resources learned to value saving over splurging. Its politicians codified that mindset into law. Don't raid the treasure build, something that lasts. The Viking raids had ended 1,000 years ago, but the mindset of rationing, preparing, and thinking in generations endured. Today, the Viking money machine is more than a fund. It's a shield. When crises hit, from the 2008 crash to the 2020 pandemic, Norway dipped into its reserves instead of drowning in debt. While other nations borrowed trillions, Norway simply opened its vault. That's not just comfort, it's sovereignty. A country of 5 million people sits on a fund larger than the GDP of most major economies. The lesson is simple but rare. Most nations spend like raiders, burning through resources as fast as they arrive. Norway built like shipwrights, investing in the hull, reinforcing the frame, and planning for storms. That's why its oil fund is studied as the textbook case of escaping the resource curse. It's also a mirror for us. Every society, every person faces the same question. Do you spend everything now, or do you build something that lasts? Do you consume your resources or turn them into assets that work for you? At the national level, That's the difference between Venezuela and Norway. At the personal level, it's the line between debt and freedom. The irony is that the modern Vikings got rich not by conquest, but by restraint. They taxed heavily, saved diligently, invested globally, and refused to gorge on their own fortune. That discipline created one of the greatest accumulations of real wealth in history. Today, Norway's treasure isn't in gold or silver. It's in equities, bonds, and assets that earn quietly while the rest of the world spends. The long ships became portfolios, and the raids became dividends. The final truth is simple. Wealth is not what you find, it's what you keep. The oil under the North Sea could have cursed Norway, as oil has cursed so many others. Instead, discipline turned it into a blessing. The Viking money machine proves that real wealth doesn't come from discovery, it comes from design. From the rules you set, the patience you maintain, and the courage to think beyond the present. History doesn't repeat, but money obeys patterns. Most nations burn through their treasure. Norway didn't. And that's why the descendants of the Vikings are richer today than any of their ancestors ever dreamed. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.